Brian, what was your question going to be?
I was going to be talking about generals in the White House, but I actually have a little different question now.
Okay.
The debate in the Democratic nominating process right now has been change versus experience, which is very simplistic, obviously, but what changes are important, and especially in an election where all the candidates are coming from the Senate, as you said.
Yeah.
Are Hillary's experiences important compared to Barack's? And if she does win based on experience and then goes against McCain, who has much more experience in the Senate, obviously, how does that shake out?
One of the curiosities, one of the abiding curiosities of American politics is we never know how it shakes out until it shakes out. People audition for the presidency. They run for the presidency, they debate, they do all this stuff. They say, look at my experience, look at my judgment, look at my charisma, look at this, look at that. We never know what kind of presidents they're going to make until they become president, simply because there's no other job quite like it. Being a senator doesn't demonstrate your skills to be president. Being a governor doesn't demonstrate your skills to be president. Being a corporate executive doesn't. Being, you name it, nothing prepares you for being president. So when we elect presidents, we are really buying a pig in a poke. We don't know what we're going to get. However, every 4 years we got to try. We do the best we can. We operate on insufficient information. Okay, so how does experience count? Well, as I say, nobody has the experience of being president until you're president. Nobody has to make the decisions. However, if you have studied the issues for a long time, if you have been involved on the Military Affairs Committee, if you have been on the Foreign Relations Committee, if you've been on Appropriations, if you've been on Ways and Means, then presumably you know the issues. And that's better than not knowing the issues. Now, I happen to think that the war in Iraq was a bad idea. I don't know how it'll turn out. History might prove me wrong. But one of the reasons I think that it was a bad idea was, and one of the reasons I think that the decision was made, despite the fact that I think it was a bad idea, was that this particular president had very little knowledge of foreign affairs before he became president. And I was living in Austin since 1981, but I was there in 1999 and 2000 when then Governor Bush was receiving his cram course on foreign affairs from Condoleezza Rice, who would fly in every few weeks and brief him on foreign affairs. And I'm sure it was a top-level briefing. But it's not the same kind of understanding you get if you've been thinking about this subject for 20 or 30 years. So in that regard, Senate experience, especially regarding foreign affairs, can be very valuable. I say especially regarding foreign affairs because if you're a governor, you don't get foreign affairs experience. If you're a governor, you do get experience regarding things like taxes and expenditures on certain kinds of things. Even the biggest state, California, New York, Texas, Florida, these are nowhere near the size of the United States, but at least you understand about writing up a budget. You understand about how a tax code might work. But nothing as a governor prepares you for foreign policy. When I said that Lyndon Johnson was successful as a legislator-in-chief but not as a commander-in-chief, Senate experience can be very valuable in that regard. If you understand how the Senate works, if you understand how the House works, you have a better chance of getting your measures passed. Another kind of experience that really does help a lot is experience in the public eye and experience with the modern media. The most successful presidents have understood how to use whatever medium was predominant in their day to their advantage. Theodore Roosevelt was brilliant in his use of mass circulation newspapers, which had just become available within that decade. Franklin Roosevelt was a virtuoso at the radio, which again, he was the first president able to and who did use the radio. Ronald Reagan was brilliant with television. I don't know who the president of the internet age is going to be. I don't even know what talents are required to use the internet successfully. But somebody's going to come along and is going to know how to use it and how to reach people more effectively than anybody has used it before. So experience does matter. But the biggest virtue that you can bring to the table as president, and here I would suggest this applies across all areas of leadership, and it's the absolute hardest one to test until you do it, and that is judgment. Can you judge people? Can you judge things like talent, loyalty? Can you tell when two sets of people are arguing that you should do two opposite things? You know, who's right? Who's wrong? It's one of these things that comes down to a case-by-case sort of thing, but I suppose that there are certain traits. When you're hiring somebody, can you look into that person's soul? Can you figure out what that person's motivations are? And can you tell if this is going to be a good person to have working for you? Now, in this regard, maybe a good training ground, I don't know, but maybe a good training ground is a field that has given us almost no presidents. It's a field that doesn't extrapolate to other fields. Almost no other leaders come from this field, and that is the judiciary. Because, if you think about it for a minute, being a judge requires this sort of, judgment. And, help me out here, Glees. Have we ever had a president who was, what's the highest level judge we've ever had as president? We haven't had a Supreme Court justice who became president, have we?
Probably Truman. Well, didn't the counties?
Charles Evans Hughes had been a justice, and he ran for president, was nearly elected, but he lost in 16.
It could be argued that Taft, of course, has a judicial temperament, but of course that's afterwards.
Well, that's right. Yeah. In fact, Taft is a good example here of a judicial temperament. And of course, in Taft's case, that's what he aspired to be. He didn't want to be president.
I'm sorry.
And so he finally got what he wanted after being, I won't call him a failure exactly as a president. Oh, here's something else just to keep in mind. This is kind of a side, but how we evaluate presidents. People like Gleaves and myself, and those people are in this presidential studies kind of gig. One of the things that we do, for better or worse, and sometimes I think it's a little bit for worse, is we elevate two-term presidents above one-term presidents. It's just kind of a reactive thing. If you're a two-term president, you're more important than a one-term president. Because almost always I guess Coolidge and, Coolidge is sort of 1.5 terms. Polk, is there anybody else who could have run a second time and said, no, I don't want to?
It was Hayes. Truman.
Truman's sort of almost 2 terms anyway, and he couldn't have got the nomination. So anyway, it's very rare, but it's interesting that judges don't become president.
What about Grover Cleveland? Now, was he a justice of the peace?
Maybe, but of course he had been mayor of Buffalo and then governor of New York.
Yeah.
But I don't think there have ever been any federal judges, have there?
No.
Okay, and maybe it's simply because maybe it's the same reason that college professors don't become president. Here I flatter ourselves, and what I mean is here, and of course the one exception to this is Woodrow Wilson. But the reason we all don't is once you get tenure, it's very difficult to give up this lifetime no-cut contract. And if you're a federal judge, it's the same thing. You got your job for life, and they can't reduce your salary. And to give that up for the chance you might be president, boy, you'd really have to itch for the White House to do that. And I think maybe it's a shame. Maybe we would get better judgment in the White House, or for that matter in the Senate and the House, if we actually had more judges. I don't know. Other questions?